Everybody, and call this meeting numéro 24.
Welcome to meeting 24 of this committee.
The ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and express gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to continue its study of marine and coastal protections, and I would like to thank today's witnesses for their understanding when the committee meetings were cancelled on February 11th and for reorganizing their schedule to be here in person or virtually. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to regulation, and members can participate in person or through the Zoom application.
I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. Pursuant to our routine motions, I would like to advise the committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have successfully conducted the required technical testing, and also make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
For the interpretation, for those who are on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English, and French. For those in the room, you can use earpiece and choose the channel of your choice.
Be addressed through the chair. Pour les députés présents dans la salle, si vous souhaitez.
For those in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. And for members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function.
With that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. In person, we have Doug Maven, commercial harvester. Appearing by video conference, we have Colin Spruill, President, Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association, and also participating by video conference, we have Glenn Kearse, General Manager, Coast Tsimshian Fish Plant Limited. So with that, we're going to start with the witnesses' opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Mr. Martin, or with Mr. Maven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honored members of Parliament for this opportunity. My name is Doug Maven. I'm a commercial fisherman with over 40 years in the industry. My family actively participates in nearly all the coastal fisheries. We have also supported fisheries management through survey work and industry associations. Commercial fishing has been the backbone of our family through 4 generations. Not only does commercial fishing provide fresh seafood for our family, but for the world. We take great care and pride in providing high-quality seafood while practicing responsible stewardship of this rich resource. We depend on strong, healthy, well-managed, viable fisheries. Commercial fishing in BC is being directly impacted by the MPA process, particularly in the Northern Shelf bioregion. In 2019, industry participants came together at our own time and expense to develop a plan that met conservation objectives while significantly mitigating impacts to our fisheries. This was a substantial, well-organized effort undertaken by the Marine Planning Team. We met all conservation targets while reducing impacts to our industry by approximately 75%. Despite this, the partners in the Northern Shelf bioregion chose to disrespect this effort in pursuit of their own agendas. BC already has such measures as 164 rockfish protected areas, which have never had any form of assessment, 29 glass sponge reef closures equal in size to Ottawa, and other robust measures such as strict bycatch quotas, world-class fisheries monitoring systems, and highly adaptive management plans designed to support and protect our marine resources. Bycatch quotas are so stringent that they have had the effect of closing large areas to hook and line ground fishing as bycatch exceeds directed catch to such an extent that it has made these areas inaccessible to many groundfish fisheries. Our fisheries have adapted to these measures well. We have learned to adjust and avoid closed conservation areas and bycatch species to harvest our directed catch. We have world-class logbook data collection and real-time vessel monitoring systems to accurately track our fishing activities. Unfortunately, the MPA process has chosen to use our data to identify more areas for closure. These are the areas our fisheries have adapted to where we can still meet our fisheries objectives for both conservation and harvests. At the same time our fisheries are being confronted with the realities of the MPA process, we are now also confronted with a number of First Nations, Indigenous, protected and conserved areas declared outside of federal processes. Fishermen are left on their own to deal with this issue. DFO tells us these areas are open to commercial fishing, while the First Nation proponents threaten us directly with serious consequences if we fish. DFO and the RCMP have chosen to pursue a policy of appeasement and non-enforcement of commercial fishing rights. In the cases of conflict, the DFO solution is to close those areas, citing a safety concern. In total, rockfish, glass sponge reef closures, bycatch rules, MPAs, and First Nation demands have condensed our fisheries into an ever-shrinking footprint. My business has been directly impacted by crowded fishing grounds, reduced productivity resulting in increased fishing costs. Our fishing businesses are shouldering the financial burden for a UN-driven agenda supported by the Government of Canada. These and many other decisions by the Department continue to willfully undermine commercial fishing in BC. The human cost to our industry is tangible. Young people are leaving our industry in droves at the same time our largest age cohort is retiring. To be clear, this issue is not a reflection of the state of our fish stocks or the health of our marine ecosystems. It is a direct response to a consistent government policy to undermine commercial fishing in BC. Nowhere is this more evident than in my own family. Ask any one of my 4 children, and they will tell you that they love commercial fishing. Unfortunately, none of my children can see commercial fishing as a pursuable career, so for my family, our fishing business and all its knowledge built over 4 generations of hard work ends with me. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Colin Sproul for 5 minutes or less.
Committee Chair and members, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our views. I appear before you today on behalf of the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association. For 30 years, we have represented owner-operator fishing families on the shores of the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. Our group has a distinguished history of advocating for sustainable fishing practices and community-based fisheries management. Over this time, our commitment to responsible use of resources has led us to partnerships with many groups in academia and the conservation community. We have a history of cooperation with governments and regulators at all levels, earning us a reputation as a valuable ally on ocean issues. Our members are proud of this legacy and committed to preserving our way of life for future generations of Nova Scotians. We have significant concerns surrounding the development of marine protected areas. When first summoned to DFO headquarters in Atlantic Canada and presented with the department's plans, we were shocked to discover that areas of interest for the development of marine protected areas had already been identified and settled on. 2 areas in particular encompass the most economically important fishing grounds for our members, areas they have fished responsibly and sustainably for generations. Exclusions from these fishing grounds would be a death blow to our members' way of life. The fact these areas of interest within the Bay of Fundy were settled on without fulsome consultation with the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association speaks for itself. The reason for this exclusion was clear to us: the unprincipled alliance between the department, some Canadian universities, and environmental non-governmental organizations, ENGOs. The majority of these ENGOs take significant amounts of foreign funding, then use that money to lobby the Canadian government. Some universities receive massive subsidies from the federal government, then act to produce work that seeks to justify the ideological motivations of the current government surrounding ocean protection. A small group of academics, familiar to each other, are the dominant players within all three of these groups. Coastal communities are left wondering, whose interests are being represented by individuals that seem to move freely between their jobs as regulators, scientists, and lobbyists? We believe it's important to note that all of Canada's seas enjoy a very high level of protection, protections which generally exceed those offered by the creation of marine protected areas in developing countries. Canada's commitments at the United Nations to arbitrary protection levels of 20 and 30% of our seas were made by representatives of these same ENGOs, again, without any consultation with our industry. Previous governments had seen fit to appoint to represent such an important industry at these tables. None have been appointed since 2015, leaving our fishery represented by groups eager to disparage us, even though we have some of the best managed fisheries on Earth. The same behavior continues to be exhibited by the Department of Fisheries, who seem happy to collaborate financially and otherwise with Canadian and even American ENGOs to unfairly disparage the Canadian fishing industry. Seeing our own tax dollars spent in America to damage our reputation for sustainable fishing in a market so important to us is outrageous. Fish harvesters rightly expect our own government to champion us on the international stage. Like most of the myriad of problems we see within the Department of Fisheries today, these ones are certainly centered on a lack of engagement and consultation with fishers and their organizations, and the undeserved influence of ENGOs. It's time to push pause on the development of MPAs and re-engage with coastal communities to prevent the severe economic damage that will happen under present plans to the most important industry in Atlantic Canada. Trust between our industry and the department on the development of MPAs has certainly been broken. The onus is now on the Department of Fisheries to rebuild that trust. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, I invite your questions.
Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to conclude with opening remarks with Glenn Kearse for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Glenn Kearse. I am the General Manager for Coshimshim Fish Plant, which is solely owned by Lac Lambs First Nation. In addition, I am the General Manager of Fishing Operations for Lac Lambs. I've worked for the nation since 2012, and I've been fishing on this coast for 44 years. I'm a third-generation fisherman. I am a director of the Deep Sea Trawlers Association of British Columbia, a director of the Canadian Groundfish Research and Conservation Society, and a member of the Groundfish Trawl Advisory Board. Through these roles, I'm actively involved in co-management and decision-making process that support the sustainable management of our trawl fishery. Fishing isn't just my job, it's my life, my family history, and the backbone of the community. Our nation has managed marine resources sustainably for over 15,000 years, guided by Tsimshian law. And a 7th-generation planning mindset, conservation is not something new to us, it's who we are. Today, I'm not here to argue against conservation. I'm here to talk about how marine protected areas are being implemented and the very real risk this approach poses to sustainable fisheries, Indigenous livelihoods, and coastal infrastructure. At Coshimshim Fish Plant, we employ 100 people full-time, and during peak salmon season, that number grows to 170, which is 25% of the community. These are good family supporting jobs in a remote community where employment options are extremely limited. Meaningful, stable employment is critically important to community well-being and plays a key role in supporting positive social and mental health outcomes in Indigenous communities. We are also the only First Nations groundfish processing facility on the North Coast. If our plant slows or shuts down, there's no alternative employer or backup plan. Jobs, income, and community stability are immediately at risk. The Northern Shelf Bioregion MPA process includes 17 signatory First Nations, yet there are 204 First Nations in British Columbia and many more nations along the coast, whose livelihoods are directly affected by these decisions. This MPA network has been developed by only a small subset of First Nations alongside a select group of government officials and NGOs, leaving a significant number of Indigenous voices unheard. Indigenous participation in Canada's commercial fisheries is substantial, with approximately 20 to 25% of license holders and participants being First Nations. And decisions of this magnitude risk creating nation-to-nation tensions by privileging some perspectives over others, rather than strengthening inclusive coast-wide relationships. We are deeply invested in our sustainable fisheries and want to ensure they remain viable and accessible so Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishing families alike can continue to participate for generations to come. That's why the Northern Shelf Bioregion MPA process is so concerning. This will not just take away livelihoods and food security, it risks decimating entire Indigenous coastal communities. The groundfish trawl fishery that supplies our conservation measures in the world. In 2000, footprint that froze the existing fishing area and that's like coral and sponges. Today, trawling occurs on less than 6% of the entire BC coast. That footprint is permanent. We do not fisheries are MSC certified across 16 species using both bottom and midwater gear. That certification is global recognition that these fisheries are sustainable, well-managed, and environmentally responsible. Yet despite all of this, the Northern Shelf Bioregion proposes to remove access to an additional 27% of trawl fishing areas. On the Pacific Coast, we already have world-class fisheries management. We operate under rigorous science, real-time monitoring, enforceable rules, and adaptive management that responds to changing conditions in the ocean. These systems are not theoretical, they are working every day on the water. As a third-generation fisherman with 44 years of experience, I am proud of the fisheries management system we have in place. I believe it is doing an excellent job of protecting sensitive habitat and conserving fishing stocks and supporting a healthy, thriving marine ecosystem. That success should be recognized and built upon, not overridden by policies that ignore the strength of the system we already have. I want to be very clear. You cannot keep taking away access and expect a fishery to survive. When fishing areas are closed, effort doesn't disappear. That creates congestion, safety risks, operation inefficiencies, ultimately undermines the very sustainable goals MPAs are meant to achieve. Thank you for letting me speak today to the committee. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. That concludes our round of opening introductions. And with that, we're going to start our first round of questions, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank witnesses for coming forward for this important study. First of all, Mr. Chair, I have a question for Mr. Sproul. Mr. Sproul, you've been an exceptional advocate for the fishing industry in southwest Nova Scotia for several decades. The fishing industry is worth close to $1 billion or maybe a little more to your region, to fishing families, to suppliers, boat builders, and all others in your economy that rely on spin-offs created by the fishing industry. And this committee has sought answers in terms of economic impact, cost-benefit analysis, and whatnot from those who advocate for the government's following of the 30 by 30 UN initiative. Have you ever seen an economic impact statement or study or whatnot about the effect that shutting down of areas to the fishing industry will have to the fishing industry and those that rely on its spin-offs?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Small's question is a very important one, and the answer is no. The department, I think, freely admits at this point that they don't have a sense of the extreme economic impact from some of the ideologically motivated decisions they continue to make in fisheries management. Generator in Nova Scotia, its largest export, biggest employer, and a bedrock and a backbone of the Atlantic Canadian economy. And I think that members of the industry rightly expect the government to appreciate those concerns before they move forward. But I think, as detailed in some of the testimony here today, our opinions were not only excluded on the sustainability conservation side, but also on the economic side. And what we see is that the chief motivation for the development of the MPAs has come from ENGOs, who seem to act as an echo chamber for Liberal government policy. And what we see is an attempt for this government to achieve social license for their aims, their ideologically motivated aims on conservation with communities that they certainly have no social license in. And let me be clear that the coastal communities that I speak for do not support the development of these areas on our most important fishing grounds when it's possible to still protect our oceans, reach our targets in places that aren't so economically important to the fishing industry. And it seems like, the parallels on the land are that when we protect forest, for instance, that we protect old growth forest, not a place that's very important for forestry.
So Mr. Sproul, are you saying that the current government could achieve its 30 by 30 objectives and to appease the United Nations by protecting areas that are basically pristine and pure and never fished versus areas that are basically have been fished and over the years, as happens with land use, sometimes the damage is hard to repair. So to your point that you made earlier, how much ocean do you think there is out there that basically has never been touched by industry of any form that's available for 100% protection?
Yes, certainly we have the space in Canada to reach our UN targets without affecting the economically important fishing grounds. We've seen that same approach used by the United States during the Obama administration. They protected a huge swath of American ocean without having any effect on commercial fishing. And so it comes back to the initial consultation period where we weren't asked about areas that we thought would be important to protect, but also just as importantly, to not affect our members' bottom line. But it takes you to another really important point, is that we have generational knowledge of the ecologically sensitive areas that we believe should be protected. The nursery grounds of our lobster industry, for instance, we were never offered the chance to input before the development of the areas of interest for which areas we thought were ecologically sensitive, which seems beyond reason considering our members' generational knowledge of what areas are important.
So quickly, Mr. Sproul, the time is a bit short here, but Mr. Sproul, we've heard testimony here from those who advocate for 30 by 30 marine protection that shutting down areas to fishing will increase opportunities outside of those areas. But do you believe that? Chair, you're going to have to.
Mr. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry.
You just had 30 seconds there, or 20.
We'll add another 10 seconds.
Mr.
Sorry, gentlemen.
Would you like to start that over again?
Yeah, certainly. I just want to point out that we have the best managed fishery on Earth. The lobster fishery of Atlantic Canada right now is the most valuable fishery that has ever existed in history anywhere on Earth. And it's because of organic management from within the industry by fishermen. And the idea that the ocean needs to be protected from us is wrong-headed thinking. Fishing families will always be the best stewards of the resource, and the reason is clear, because generations of our family have relied on it, and we intend to have our children and generations later also rely on it. And so there are no greater stewards of the industry than us, and I totally reject the false narrative that MPAs are needed to protect the ocean from fishing in Canada, where we have some of the most regulated fisheries on Earth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Gault.
Next, we'll give the floor to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Come our new colleague here, Mr. Chris Biddle, who is replacing Mr. Morrissey today. First, I'm going to start with Mr. Sproul. Mr. Sproul, thanks for being here again with us today. Like I said in the last meeting to another of your colleagues, Mr. McPherson, you're here so often that I think we're going to have to give you a points card for attending so many meetings, but your input is always welcome. So, look, you've talked about the challenges regarding those MPA, and I think you're talking for the Bay of Fundy. So those maps that you're talking about, those MPA that are proposed, in your opinion, is this just a proposition of some area that we want to maybe close to fishing, or this is something that you will be able to discuss in Cummings meeting with DFO official and fishing organization on what these MPA will look like? What is the problem that you see right now with those proposed MPAs?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think that's a great question, Mr. Cormier. I think what it comes back to is a lack of trust, and there's definitely been a broken bridge of trust between the industry and its representative associations and the department. So, while the areas I'm talking about are proposed areas of interest and have not been first ranked for the creation of an MPA yet, there's no trust within our membership that our interests will be considered at this point. And I've seen MPAs begin to be developed, and fishermen ask for simple things like, will trap fisheries and hook and line fisheries still be allowed to be active there, and write it in stone for us. But the department continually deflects from clear answers on that and refuses to put it in writing for the industry. So I really think that the members' concerns are all founded in a lack of trust between us and the department. And to rebuild that trust, we need to start over at ground zero and be able to offer our input about where we think areas of interest should be. As I point out again, that I think my members recognize that there are ecologically important areas within our own fishing grounds where we don't fish, but we know they're important for nursery grounds and other important life cycle processes that we'd like to see come forward. So I would say that the answer to your question is to rebuild that trust.
So in terms of trust, within your members, is it because, like you said, that you arrive at a meeting, there's a map that is put on the table from the official, and they're basically saying, hey guys, by the way, this is the zone that, we maybe want to close to fishing. Is that what I'm hearing from you? This is how it happens in meetings?
That is how it happens. I would say the other thing that's most important to us and perhaps most ominous is when we arrive at those tables, we see representatives from ENGOs who are getting almost the entirety of their funding from American sources sitting at the table with the same stakeholder status that we have, having already been given an opportunity privately to offer input before the meeting even happens. And when I go home and I go on the World Wide Web and I search and I look at the board of directors for those groups, I frequently see that they're a who's who list of former staffers from Justin Trudeau's government, and it leads us to question their motives.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sproul. Mr. Maven, look, I'm not that much familiar with BC fishing, but my dad was a fisherman all his life on the East Coast. So what kind of fishing are you doing? If I think you said that in your speech, what kind of fishing enterprise do you have?
Presently, I commercially fish salmon.
Okay.
I've done for years. I've been active in herring fishing, halibut, groundfish, hook and line, so rockfish species, lingcod, and I also commercially fish prawns. Now that I'm a little older, I don't fish as much as I used to, but I used to spend approximately 7 months of the year at sea.
Okay. And some of those zones that you're talking in the BC area, some of those zones are close to some of your fishing? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Very much so.
And you were talking about the bycatch also, and you said that you managed to kind of, adapt to this. How did you did that? Like, because like bycatch, as you can imagine, and people that know the industry, is a little bit difficult to manage when you fish for a certain species and you catch like so many others. So how did you manage to make that happen?
Well, so in BC currently, there are areas that most of us know. Our industry is highly collaborative, and so we fishermen, we cooperate with each other tremendously because we have to. It's out of necessity. The old days where we used to keep secrets doesn't work because we have to assist each other in being able to harvest our catch. And so we give each other information on where we can fish and where we can't fish. And there are tremendous areas in BC now where the bycatch amount, the volume of bycatch is so high, the stocks are so strong that you can't access your directed catch there. So for an example with halibut, you would like to go and fish your halibut. You've got a quota of halibut to catch, but you've got a very small, very tightly regulated bycatch of rockfish to work with. And so it precludes you from a tremendous amount of fishing grounds, just that in itself. So what's happened is our halibut fishery has become concentrated onto the fishing grounds where we can actually get the job done and work within the rules.
Thank you.
Prochainement, on va
Next, we'll go to Mr. Beaulieu for 6 minutes. Welcome to the committee today. Thank you. Thank you very much to our witnesses. I have first a fairly general question. I mean, you talked about it at length, Mr. Sproul, but you talked about what seemed to be a lack of consultation of harvesters. How could we improve the process? I mean, do you have any specific proposals so that we can get buy-in, so it can really be a cooperative effort to establish these MPAs?
S'adresse aussi à l'ensemble des...
It's to all other witnesses also, whoever wishes to answer.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Bedeo. I think the best way to rebuild the process is first and foremost to have ENGOs and other people who clearly do not have a stake in the conservation of our oceans, a direct stake, to be removed from those tables, and also bring more transparency to the interactions between researchers at Atlantic Canadian and other Canadian universities who are doing the research that the government's proposals are being founded on. More transparency between the interactions between them, the ENGOs, and the government to rebuild trust, and also to press reset on the MPA development process and ask the industry for areas that we feel are economically important, but to be excluded, and also ask us for areas that we think are ecologically important to be included, because neither of those have ever happened yet.
Est-ce que d'autres gens voulaient répondre?
Would anybody else like to answer that question?
Sinon, je vais aller un peu de l'avant.
Otherwise, I'll move ahead a little bit. Mr. Sproul, earlier you talked again about the lobbyists who are integrated into the process and who are met with before you're even part of the consultations. You say they go through previous officials from the Trudeau era and so on, and that leads you to be on your guard, of course. Have you in the past been able to look into whether that is in line with the Government of Canada's ethics rules?
Mr. Sproul, your microphone's muted again.
Sorry about that. That would be outside of my area of expertise, but what I'd say is what's even more important are the perceptions of coastal communities in the fishing industry. And I think it's a reasonable expectation for us to be able to see a transparent process about the interactions between all of them. And I think also important is that if an NGO intends to lobby the Canadian government to influence Canadian government policy, especially when it comes to things like trans-border fishery stocks, that we should rightly expect those NGOs to have to publicly declare where the money is coming from that is funding their activities and what direction they're taking. And those seem to be reasonable safeguards to build a better process in the future.
Parfait.
Perfect. I still have time? Okay. My question is for the other witnesses. On your end, do you feel that the fisheries industry is consulted enough and that its point of view is taken into account?
Want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So with respect to the Northern Shelf bioregion in particular, our industry in 2019 came together at our own personal expense, and it was a considerable effort in BC, organized by our marine planning team. Numerous of us, I think there was up to 700 participants, if the number serves me correctly, went back and forth to Nanaimo all winter long, and we sat in a room full of other fishermen with the charts out, and we talked about the areas that we could lose and the areas we had to keep. And we developed a plan that would have met the target for conservation while mitigating the impacts on our industry. And when we submitted it at the end of the day, none of that's been gazetted, and it was all turfed out the window, and we were told by the Northern Shelf bioregion partners that they were just going to do what they see fit. And so that's that's how industry has perceived what's going on in BC. There's not a lot of collaboration, and you go to the meetings and they tell you how it's going to be, and that's what we got in BC.
Donc, ce que vous dites, c'est qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de consultation.
What you're saying is that there's not really any consultation. You are organizing your own meetings and so on, and your point of view is completely left out.
Que ça représente le point de vue aussi des autres.
Is that what the other witnesses have seen also?
30 secondes.
30 seconds?
Bon, est-ce que
Well, when there are consultations, Mr. Sproul, you mentioned that, does the department provide a report that reflects your recommendations, even if it's not taking them into account?
Frequently, when I attend management meetings at places like the Maritimes Region Lobster Advisory Committee, when I see the minutes come back, we see our comments and our key concerns excluded or somewhat edited by managers within the department, who I would point out also are within that same small group of academics from specific universities within Atlantic Canada who circulate through management, ENGOs, and government.
Monsieur Beaulieu, et ça nous complète
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. That completes the first round.
the questioning with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Before you start my timer, if you could, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to welcome our colleague, Mr. Moore from Fundy Royal, to the committee today. And I'd also like to ask the clerk if the clerk has received a response from the minister on our request for her to appear on this study.
We don't have a response yet from the minister on this study.
Okay, thank you. I'll start my time then. Mr. Maven, do you see one group of Canadians receiving more than others out of some of the decisions out of this, the way this MPA process has been working through so far?
Very definitely. The commercial fishing industry, when we make suggestions or try to contribute, our suggestions are minimized tremendously. And so there's been a definite agenda of listening to the voices that the current government of the day chooses to listen to. I don't know how to elaborate further than that.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Would the impact of these proposed MPAs in some of the most productive fishing areas, would they be similar to creating a national park, say, covering some of our most productive agricultural areas? For example, the blueberry fields or cranberry bogs in the Lower Fraser. Would it be similar to that?
One of the areas that's scheduled to be a marine protected area is a body of water off of Frederick Island on the west coast of Haida Gwaii. I've never fished in the Maritimes, but easily that area off of Frederick Island is the most fish-rich area in BC, and I would bet likely Canada. Everything that we fish is there. There's halibut, rockfish, lingcod. The salmon migrate by there in the millions. It's extremely critical to commercial fishing, and it's one of the areas they've chosen to turn into a marine protected area. If we lose that, it would displace the volume of fish it would displace, and the earnings that it would displace would be profound.
And would that require you to spend more time at sea, more at risk of weather, burn more fuel, et cetera, to meet the same catch and incomes that you are now? And I'm not just talking you, the fleet, basically.
Question. I don't think that if we lost that area, we could replace the catch. It wouldn't. You could burn as much fuel as you wanted, and you could fish as hard as you could elsewhere. You would not come close to catching the harvest that we get in that area.
Mr. Sproul, would you like to comment on that question about how much time would have to be spent if the most productive areas are closed?
Yes, well, what I'd point out is that extreme effects on our conservation because of the previous government's direction in fisheries have moved our membership to a point of barely being profitable. And if they're forced to go further to try and catch lobsters or catch fish, our businesses won't be profitable. Fishermen and our industry has been brought to its knees by the application of ideology in fisheries management. We need to come back to the application of sound science that's transparent and that everybody who relies on healthy fisheries can trust in. And the truth is that there's a reason that some of these grants have been fished for generations. They're very, very abundant in the species that we harvest, and the idea that we can just go somewhere else and conduct our activity is ridiculous. And it points back to the lack of consultation during the early stage of the process.
Okay, thank you. For Mr. Kearse, you were saying that you're the only fish plant operating now in that area of the coast, and that you felt your bands in your area hadn't been consulted. Has DFO made an attempt to put everyone in the same room to talk about these proposals so that everyone could hear each other's sides of this, or has it been isolated consultations with different user groups?
Yeah, well, just a little correction there. We're actually the only First Nations ground fishing plant in BC, not the only fish plant. And we haven't been in a room with all the First Nations to have a talk together.
You've been in the same room with other non-Indigenous harvesters or other user groups on these proposals?
Yes, we have.
You have? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Arnold, next we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. It's a wealth of information that you provide to us. Mr. Sproul, I believe it was you talked about there being more than a fair share of ENGOs at the table, and that we needed to start the process all over again without any ENGOs. Do you not see any relevance? What would you think would be the appropriate makeup of the group making these decisions?
Well, I think that people that sit at management tables need to be people that have a direct stake in the resource. I would say that in terms of judgments against specific ENGOs, that Canadians should have transparency surrounding their funding and their intent so that we can all make those judgments ourselves based on them. I certainly would have more willingness to create a space within management, not at a stakeholder table for an ENGO, if they were getting their funding from Canadians and lobbying on behalf of Canadian interests. But I think we should accept that when you are taking huge amounts of funding from foreign countries, that you will be lobbying for interests within that country and not Canadians. I think it's important to point out why it's not our area of interest here maybe today, but within my own community, I see ENGOs having undue influence and holding back the development of many other industries in Nova Scotia as well, like mining and forestry and agriculture. And I think as Canadians, they need to be reckoned with, and we need to make sure that money that is lobbying in Canada is Canadian money, and it's lobbying on behalf of Canadians' interests. Now, whether those interests are environmental or industry related, is that's a different question. But I think as Canadians, especially in this time and place, that we should reject totally the influence of American money on the management of Canadian fisheries.
Thank you. Mr. Kears and Mr. Maven, you're both third-generation harvesters, fishers. And I'll start with Mr. Maven. You mentioned that you have 4 children and not any of them are planning to stay within the industry. What kind of changes would you think would have to be made in order to make it viable for a 4th generation of your family to continue on in the industry?
Thank you for the question. It comes down to opportunity. And we don't get that in BC anymore. You know, this year in BC, the Fraser River returned one of the biggest sockeye runs in recent memory. Huge volume of sockeye went up the Fraser River. And my family's fished the Fraser River for 4 generations. My grandfather fished the Fraser River. And this year, everybody got to fish the Fraser River sockeye except for Canadian commercial fishermen. The Americans fished full bore, First Nations fished full bore, recreational fishermen got to fish, and when we finally got an opportunity, it wasn't an opportunity that the minister offered us, it was an insult. It was a teaspoon of fish, and that's what's happening in BC, and we can't abide that any longer. We need to have viable fisheries. Managed scientifically, we don't want to overharvest, not one of us does, we never have. But when the opportunity presents itself, we need to get it. And that's hasn't been happening for a great many years now.
Thank you. A follow-up, I think you talked about the areas where you need to do the harvesting, and there's a huge amount of fish there. But if with your input, if we reduce the amount of the areas that are designated as MPAs, so that we can ensure that conservation continues as well as harvesting is available, how would you see the fishers in your area responding to something like that?
Well, we already did respond very positively. And as I said before, we came together and we developed a plan that would work. It was no small undertaking. It took quite a bit of effort on our behalf and no small amount of sacrifice. But we've done that. The work is there. The information has been provided to the department. It's just up to the department to choose whether or not they want to adopt it.
So you'd be prepared to give up some of the area, but just not to the extent that you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely, and we've been clear on that.
Thank you.
Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Beaulieu.
Next, we'll go to Mr. Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. Yes. I'd like to know, when there's compensation provided to harvesters, are there specific advantages or benefits? How does it work? What would your comments be on that, on the compensation that is provided, if there are any, when there are MPA projects?
Ma question s'adresse à tous.
My question is to all witnesses.
Monsieur Sproul.
At least in our case in Nova Scotia, as far as I'm aware, there is no compensation framework proposed for the development of MPAs.
the same for BC. There's been no compensation offered.
Est-ce que vous pensez que ça pourrait être
Do you think that is something that could help you when you are truly being penalized by these MPAs for there to be compensation?
sûrement?
No,
Of course.
I don't think it's possible for compensation to make up for the generational loss of wealth to these communities. If we were to compensate the fishermen of today, that would be the end of it. But let me be clear. I'm really concerned with my colleague's statements from British Columbia about the inability for his family to continue in that generational family business. Everything that we do at the Bay of Fundy Inshore Fishermen's Association is directly because of that. We feel that we have a duty to our children and to the next generations to preserve this resource, and taking compensation today is not in keeping with that duty. But we also have a debt to our grandfathers who worked their fingers to the bone to create this profitable and sustainable industry for us. Those are our most important concerns, not compensation in the short term.
I would agree with Mr. Spruill's comments wholeheartedly. Fishermen in BC don't want compensation. We're proud Canadians. We would like to work. We're proud to work. We want opportunity. We don't want compensation.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu.
Next, we're going to go to, we have short and last round. We'll do 4 minutes and 4 minutes. Mr. Gunn, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Maven, how long has your family been involved in commercial fishing? How many generations?
On my mother's side, 4 generations now.
Can you see that business, that wealth of knowledge being passed down to your children?
Yes, I've done my best with it, but I can pass down the knowledge and the information and the business, but I can't pass down the opportunity, and that's where my hands are tied.
And can you connect with people why this next generation of people aren't getting involved in fishing, that they don't see those opportunities and instead they see uncertainty, and perhaps how the Northern Shelf bioregion, how this network of underwater parks or MPAs is contributing to that?
Well, it's forced, the network of underwater parks is forcing concentration in our fisheries, so our fishing grounds have become more congested. In our halibut fishery, which starts in March every year, our fishery is down to a number of spots, and it's a steady stream of boats rotating over those spots. So if you're third in line, your productivity is much less than the guy that's first in line. And in terms of our other fisheries, like our herring fishery, for example, our herring fishery is not managed to science anymore. It's managed to politics. Our salmon fishery is not managed to science anymore. It's managed to politics. There's decisions made about who gets to fish and when that are outside of scientific rules and more to do with political goals.
Does it seem to you that in general that policy making at DFO is being driven by politics and activists as opposed to, say, science and common sense?
Absolutely it is.
And does it frustrate you when you see these foreign-funded or government-funded activist groups that seem to be driving the decision-making, even though they don't have a stake in the industry? It's not their jobs on their line. It's not their way of life on the line. And yet it's fishermen like yourself that have fished for generations that are suffering the consequences, both of the real-world closures and also all of the uncertainty that this is creating.
Yeah, yeah, I'm frustrated beyond words. And it's extremely frustrating that it's the Canadian government that would pander to this. You know, the Liberal Party gave us Brian Tobin at one time. In the 40-plus years that I've been a fisherman, he's the only good fisheries minister that I've seen come from the Liberal Party. What's followed has been a succession of oceans ministers who focus on the ocean and not the fisheries. It would be nice to have a fisheries minister again.
Thank you, Mr. Mavin. Mr. Kears, we keep hearing over and over again from this government that First Nations along the coast are in support of these these massive MPA area closures, spatial closures in the Northern Shelf bioregion. But in closer inspection, it seems that that is not the case. And in fact, some of the First Nations that are most experienced with fishing and most invested in it are actually opposed, including Lax Kw'alaam and Weewakai. Can you talk about why the Lax Kw'alaam First Nation are opposed to these large closures, and if they go ahead, what are the real-world consequences on your community?
Yeah, thank you very much. For one thing, it's about the 17 signatories that they do have in place currently. They have RFEA agreements in place, reconciliation framework agreements. So those are the 17 signatories, and we don't have one in place. We're quite concerned because we're a fishing village. This has the potential to have huge cultural and social impacts on the community. Like if they continue on this path forward there, substantial reduction in fishing will bring significant social harm to the community and further disconnect the people of Lac Clams from their heritage and their culture. And already operating, like we mentioned in my testimony, in 2012, we had a trawl footprint that was implemented, and it's been doing very well. We have a bycatch of coral and sponges. It's about 4.5 ton annually. And if you look back over the catch history, there's still 98, 96% remaining of that every year. So these trawl footprints that we have in place seem to be doing a great job.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in there. We're going to end with Mr. Cormier for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Sproul, I'm going to go back to you. Look, I know you said that you were not happy maybe with the past government, and you named the former prime minister. It's a new government in place. It's a new prime minister in place. And a lot of group that came to this committee or that we met with seems to be a little bit more happy with the way that DFO is making some decision right now. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. For example, in your area on the Bay of Fundy, there's a lot more arrests that is being done. When it comes to illegal fisheries, there's thousands and thousands of lobster that were seized and put back in the water. Do you actually see a little bit of difference in your area when it comes to enforcing the law?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I would say in response to Mr. Cormier is that that's not the basis for the meeting today, but since he asked, I'd be happy to answer. What I see is similar.
Just a minute before you respond. I think it's fit right in the meeting because creating MPAs is protecting the resources that you are fishing as an industry, as a group. But please, if you can just answer my question, and I'll go back after that.
Okay, well, I guess firstly, in response, I'd say I haven't seen any MPAs proposed for St. Mary's Bay or St. Peter's Bay, which continue to be fished at an industrial scale out of season. And while I appreciate that there have been some increases in enforcement in our area, still they seem to be only to generate the appearance of enforcement in the media. And if the minister and the department had intent to end the illegal fisheries in our communities, they would go to places like St. Peter's Canal and Saulnieville Harbor and arrest the people engaged in the illegal activity and seize the boats, and also maybe drag the sunken oil spewing boats out of the harbor that were left there again last winter.
I think we all seen, what was done in terms of arrests. And, in terms of illegal fishing, there's a start. I think we want to see more enforcement done. But coming back to MPA, Mr. Sproul, look, again, my first question at the beginning was about the map that was proposed to your group when you go into these meetings. What will you want to see done differently in terms of those, area creation? What will be the way that you want us to proceed, that we want the government to proceed with that going forward?
I think the path forward is clear. I think first the government needs to conduct socioeconomic studies of the fishery to see what the proposed impacts would be on coastal communities. then a new engagement process that puts harvesters first and gives us the ability to have a veto over certain areas that we know we can't remain economically viable without. And then we see the science that's being used to justify the areas that are being proposed by the government so that we can understand that it's based on conservation and not ideology. I think that's the way forward.
So in your opinion, do you think that MPAs can be good for an industry like lobster, for example?
I think MPAs have tremendous value in the developing world in places where there are no protections for the ocean at all. And that was a lot of the reason for the development at the United Nations. But the fact that we didn't have representatives of the industry at those tables, we had ENGOs at those tables saying that the Canadian industry is terrible from an environmental sustainability viewpoint, when they should have been saying, look, our oceans in Canada, every square mile of our ocean has an incredible level of protection when compared to the developing world. I think that you need to have that. You need to have that lens on how you look at this first and recognize that the benefits of MPAs to Canadian sustainability will never be as great as they are in the developing world where there are no protections at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. And that's going to end our first panel here. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today in person and by video conference. And again, just thank you for your flexibility in rescheduling from our prior time. And just want to mention your testimony is going to be very, very helpful as we put together the report and recommendations to government flowing from that as well. So you're welcome to stay in the room and watch our second panel, but at this point we're going to briefly suspend while we welcome our new witnesses. Witnesses. First, I would like to thank you for your understanding when the committee meetings were canceled on February 11th and for reorganizing your schedule to be here today. So just please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those that are participating by video conference, which is everybody, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation,
as for interpretation, for those on Zoom, you can select at the bottom of your screen the floor, the English channel, or the French channel.
Comments should be addressed through the chair. So with that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We have Professor Philippe Archambault, Directeur Scientifique du Réseau ArcticNet. And we have James Nickerson and Catherine Rigg, Directors and Owners of Atlas Ocean Tours. Et nous avons commencé avec les déclarations d'ouverture des témoins.
We will start with 5-minute opening statements from the witnesses, and we'll start with Professor Archambault. Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Philippe Archambault, full professor in the Department of Biology at Laval University and holder of the Canada Research Chair in Biodiversity and Functioning of Marine Ecosystems in Flux. I am also the scientific director of ArcticNet, one of the world's largest Arctic research networks. And just 1 minute, please. I'm going to stop your time. The interpretation is not working. Could you say a few more words, and then we'll see whether it's working? Here's the interpretation channel, English channel. Yes, interpretation is working, and you may start over. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, my name is Philippe Archambault, full professor in the Department of Biology at Laval University and holder of the Canada Research Chair in Biodiversity and Functioning of Marine Ecosystems in Flux. I am also the scientific director of ArcticNet, one of the world's largest Arctic research networks, and director of the Takavik International Laboratory. And I work in this capacity with local communities and researchers and so on. I have contributed to the... Beyond commercial fishing, we need to remember the importance of Indigenous knowledge and in the Arctic and the Pacific and Atlantic coast, the stability of both commercial and subsistence fisheries depends directly on the state of marine ecosystems. International scientific reviews show that in highly protected areas, fish biomass can be 2 to 5 times higher than outside these areas, and that the average size of the individuals increases, which greatly enhances reproductive potential. These benefits do not only concern commercial markets, but also the availability of resources for communities that depend directly on the sea for their food and way of life. Allow me to make a simple analogy. A marine protected area is like a savings account. The capital is the breeding fish that we protect. The interest is the fish, juveniles, and eggs that leave that area and support the surrounding fisheries. If we consume all the capital, there is no more interest. I'm sure you would prefer to not eat into your capital and to live off your interest instead. The methods used by government to assess the achievement of conservation objectives and the reasons for creating protected areas is very important. Secondly, ecological monitoring. In accordance with the recommendations of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the assessment focuses in particular on biomass size and abundance of species and biodiversity. And there is monitoring conducted through scientific efforts, analyses that are meta-analyses published in Science and PNAS show that fully protected areas show significant increases in biomass size and diversity on average. These references serve as a comparative framework for assessing the performance of Canadian areas. Third, the relevance of the objectives themselves must be assessed. Under the Oceans Act, each area must have specific objectives. Their effectiveness depends on various measures. Finally, the assessment is based on adaptive management, i.e. the ability to adjust boundaries or rules in light of new scientific data. This principle is consistent with Canada's commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework, which emphasizes measurable effectiveness and not just protected area size. In summary, the effectiveness of a marine protected area is not measured by its size, but by compliance with rules, improvement in ecological indicators, consistency of objectives, and adaptability. In closing, I want to speak about the Arctic. This goes far beyond conservation. And the geopolitical tensions in the Arctic have intensified. We all know that. In this context, active governance of Arctic marine areas is a key issue of sovereignty. Marine protected areas fall directly under the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, to which Canada is a signatory. Now, this convention recognizes the sovereign rights of coastal states over their exclusive economic zone and continental shelf while imposing an obligation on them to protect and preserve the marine environment.
De juridiction canadienne. Elle demeure une capacité à réglementer, surveiller.
This gives, thus, the designation and active management of marine protected areas in the Arctic, such as Tuvaijuik, which covers significant portions, is very important. Scientific monitoring associated with MPAs, whether in terms of biodiversity, the seabed, ocean conditions, or human activities, also contributes to operational knowledge of the territory, and this knowledge supports civil governance, but also indirectly strengthens maritime security and surveillance capabilities in the north.
Environnementaux, elles constituent un instrument.
They are a structuring instrument of state presence, stability, and international credibility. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I think there have been a few technical issues with the sound. But we're going to keep going.
Remarks for Atlas Ocean Tours. Ms. Rigg, you have the floor for 5 minutes or less. Oh, and I'm afraid you're still muted right now.
Apologies. Is that better?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Greetings from the West Coast. My name is Catherine Rigg. I am before you today with my husband, James Nickerson. We are small business owners on Haida Gwaii, an archipelago located off the north coast of British Columbia. Our primary company that offers kayak mothership trips in Guayhanas National Park Reserve, National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and Haida Heritage Site. Guayhanas is the southern third of Haida Gwaii and is only accessible by boat or our boat, MV Atlas, to explore the nooks and crannies of the edge of the world, as we like to call it. Our knowledge of Haida Gwaii is drawn, however, from a diversity of experience. As a small business in a remote is that of a tourism operator. But we have also worked for DFO as prawn fisheries monitors, and we have held a contract to count salmon returns on the West Coast for almost a decade. We've measured herring spawn and removed marine debris. We've worked with the Haida Nation and for the Haida Nation in different capacities.
I'm going to have to stop you very briefly here. We do have a point of order from Avec.
Yes, the quality of the sound is not enough to allow for interpretation.
Ms. Rick, I'm sorry. I'm afraid we're going to have to briefly suspend so we can look into the technical issues we're facing. We're having some gaps in sound coming through, and that's having issues for everybody, but also for interpretation. So we're going to just very briefly suspend while we can look at this.
All right.
back here. Again, apologies for the delay. We are experiencing some technical issues, but with that, I know we've been taking some efforts to try to improve matters, but our Ms. Rigg was just in the process of delivering her opening remarks. At this point, I have about 3 minutes, 40 seconds left. If you'd like to pick up where you left off, we can go from there.
All right, thank you. And I will just pick up right where I was. So as I mentioned, we've worked with the Haida Nation. James was a commercial fisherman when I met him 25 years ago. And so now while we work in tourism, our business has been consistently augmented by other consulting and contracting work. So with that introduction, I will address the questions posed by the committee. First, how have protection initiatives affected coastal communities? Well, you could ask 100 people on Haida Gwaii if the overall state of the ocean is improving, stable, or declining, and 100 people would say it is in decline. The causes may be debated and the impacts are variable on different species and in different locations, but the reality is that the oceans are in trouble and everybody knows it. We've seen declines in local salmon runs and herring stocks and pond populations as just a few examples. We also know there's no quick fix to that problem. But of all the safe bets, reducing human impacts by establishing protected areas is one that people can wrap their heads around. Implementing marine protection allows ecosystems to regain balance and resilience. This is common sense. This communities do understand. In our view, Haida Gwaii communities are generally in favor of marine protection. We know it is not enough on its own, but if we can design protection in a way that makes sense, we will comply with marine zoning, accept restrictions, and place that bet on our future. Second, are the methods used to measure protection objectives effective? In short, resourcing for ongoing monitoring is limited and insufficient. Many of these areas are remote and data collection is challenging and expensive. Not everyone can do this work. DFO needs to provide sufficient resources and partner with local First Nations to design and implement effective monitoring programs. The final question is whether the government's objectives have been achieved. Well, ecologically, these initiatives safeguard benthic and rearing habitats and protect species like rockfish and abalone. If we are all honest with ourselves, we know that to allow a place to sit, to rest, without the pressure of human extraction has value unto itself. Politically, marine protection balances the government's economic and conservation commitments. It can also build relationships with First Nations and advance reconciliation. Socially, marine protection connects people to place. It builds trust and confidence that we're taking responsibility and being respectful of the place we live in. Economically, marine protection is an investment in our future and in our children's future as both tourism operators and as fishermen. So yes, objectives are slowly being achieved, but some take more time than others. In closing, marine protection has been a long time in coming and very, very slow to progress. Let's take Waihanas, for example. The Haida Nation designated the marine and terrestrial area of a Haida Heritage Site in 1985. Parks Canada followed with a National Park Reserve designation in 1993. Waihanas was finally designated a National Marine Conservation Area Reserve in 2010, but comprehensive marine zoning did not actually happen until 2018, 33 years after the original Haida designation and 25 years after federal protection of the land. Almost all of this work has been led by the Haida Nation with the support of Parks Canada and, only more recently, the involvement of DFO. Because the truth is that DFO has not led ocean conservation on the West Coast. It has followed. It has followed First Nations, it has followed the province, and it has followed coastal communities and residents. Now it is time to lead. It is time for DFO to deliver on the promise of responsible stewardship. It is time to work with First Nations and coastal communities to move forward, because the alternative, reversing course, will set us back decades. We all, each and every one of us, have a collective duty to look after our marine front yard, not to make excuses about why we cannot do so. Thank you. Hawa, merci. We are now both available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. That'll conclude our opening remarks. We're going to go right into the first round of questioning, the 6-minute round with Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Chair, as I start here, I'd like to remind the committee that we started this, we passed a motion for this study back in September, and in that motion, the committee called for the minister to appear. We started this study January 28th, months after the motion was made. The minister appeared on short notice on February 26th, or February 2nd on Bill C-15, made time in her schedule on fairly short notice for that. And at that meeting, multiple members asked her about appearing. 3 weeks later, the minister has not responded. Today, we heard the clerk hasn't had a response. Today is meeting 4 out of 6. Perhaps the parliamentary secretary can update the committee whether he's had discussions with the minister about her appearance at this committee on this study.
I have not specifically asked her about coming here on this study, but I will. I'll get an update for the next meeting.
Okay. Seeing as that hasn't happened, then I'd like to move a motion that the committee direct the clerk to resend the committee's request for the minister to finally appear for our current study.
Okay, so pause your time here. So a motion's been put on the floor. Is there any members that would like to speak to this motion? It's been put forward. No.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, I think are all in agreement. Okay, motion passed.
Okay, thank you. We look forward to the response. I'll start, I guess, with Ms. Rigg and Mr. Nickerson. I took a look at your website for your company and your ocean tours. I noticed that the tours are, the prices are there. Could you describe what the prices are for your tours now and how you derive those?
James, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we operate 8-day and 8-night tours in Guayhanas National Park Reserve and Haida Heritage Site National Marine Conservation Area Reserve. Essentially, the bottom third of Haida Gwaii. So they're 8 nights, 8 days and 8 nights, and we offer kayaking, village site visitation with the Haida Watchman program. They're essentially a mix of whatever guests really want to do during that time. So our price for the 2026 season here is $5,800 per person, and plus GST, and that's inclusive of all equipment and food, lodgings while on board.
And does that include transportation to your site, or is that something that the clients book on their own? And if it's on their own, what would the estimated cost of that be?
Clients book their own transportation to and from Haida Gwaii. And during the summer months, at this point, flight on Air Canada from Vancouver to Sandspit is roughly $1,200 return. Plus, they would need accommodation on Haida Gwaii for at least bare minimum 3 nights or 2 nights, 1 night on either end of our tour at an absolute minimum.
So just quick adding in my head, I see about $6,000 for your tour, plus a few $100s for a flight, and then accommodation. And I don't imagine accommodation is very inexpensive on Haida Gwaii. So almost touching on $10,000 for an 8-day, 8-night tour. Would that be a rough estimate?
Yep, that's fair. That's a fair estimate. I would like to note that we're also the least expensive option currently operating large vessel tours in Guayhanas. So it can range from our price point to over $12,000 per person for a roughly 8-9 day tour in Guayhanas.
Okay, thank you. That doesn't sound to me it would be very accessible for an ordinary, average income earning British Columbian or let alone Canadian to come from across the country. So where would your clientele be based out of? Would they be domestic or foreign clients?
So there are other tour operation options in Guayhanas that are much less of a time and money commitment. Anything ranging from a single day tour for $500 or $600 to 2 to 4 day tours in the $3,000-4,000 range with various operators. For us, about 60 to 70% of our annual clients are from Canada. The other roughly 30% are predominantly American, with some European, mostly from the provinces of Ontario and Alberta and BC.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to put this in place of the current affordability crisis that we're seeing in Canada. A lot of Canadians can't afford to put food on the table, and yet these MPAs are going to shut down our fishing industry, potentially, as we've heard from many witnesses say that if the MPAs come in and the coastal protections as proposed, it could be the end of a lot of these fisheries on the West Coast. And it's a totally different, I guess, playing field here, that average Canadians can't afford to put food on the table, and yet we're going to shut it down for someone that can afford a $10,000 trip. It just doesn't seem to add up. Can you square that circle for me?
So, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in here. If you'd like to provide an answer in writing, that would be much appreciated, but we are over time. And so we're going to have to go, next we're going to go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Archambault, my questions will be directed to you. During your opening remarks earlier, you talked about the impact on coastal communities when marine protected areas are designated, or if there are quotas that are announced by the minister and so on. You also talked about a savings account as an analogy for those who will be impacted. At the end of the day, the communities are worried. Harvesters are worried when they see that kind of proposal being put to them, sometimes without consultation. Have you personally been able to take part in any of these meetings in terms of the MPA proposals in certain areas of Canada, in the Atlantic, for example, or in your region of Quebec? Yes, I've taken part in a number of assessments, one from the Canadian Secretariat of Canadian Researchers for the West Coast, and even the Arctic, involving Inuit communities both in Greenland and Canada. Increasingly, we're working with groups of fishers from the St. Lawrence River and estuaries to create exclusion zones for example, lobster fishing, where we looked at whether these zones are effective, whether they still provide a living for fishers. And right now, it's a collaboration and cooperation between universities, the fishers on the ground, and so on. So we've been able to show that the lobsters in those areas were bigger, stronger. The females had more eggs. So that's where the savings account analogy came in. So since these areas don't see any fishing, the lobsters get bigger, and they send out females with more eggs outside of that area, and so on. And so it seems to be working. So why, since the beginning of the study, have we not heard from any groups, and I'm talking more about the industry, seem to think that, to believe that they are properly consulted, that they're part of the solutions that are proposed? Why do they say that they won't be able to fish in those areas if an MPA is designated, when we know that there will be some fishing allowed, and that around those areas also? Why do most of the witnesses, especially fishers, tell us that they are not part of these discussions and that they have a fait accompli put before them? It's true that these as these associations say, that there is a lack of transparency and they need to be more involved. I completely agree with them. And I do also believe that as part of the department, perhaps an independent association or group could collect the data. So the department collects data and others also. So perhaps there should be the two that are put together. And we've mentioned also that sometimes higher quota are set for certain years, and sometimes it's political. And it's important to have an independent organization take part in all steps. I don't know why we wouldn't have more associations involved. I think that's, again, part of the lack of communication. Everything moves very quickly. Decision-making must involve many more stakeholders. We also had this question for some of the organizations, harvesters associations, in terms of the loss of revenue in potential MPAs. In other sectors of the Canadian economy, Mr. Archambault, we see different things happening. For example, in the automaking industry, steel, aluminum, how these industries are impacted, significantly impacted. And there's always a way to help out these industries. Do you think we will see things the same way if we create MPAs, as you said, in some regions in Quebec, for example, that would make it so that those harvesters can no longer fish in those areas? Do you think we should also look at, while doing that, to protect these areas, to provide for some kind of compensation for the first years before we see positive results of the MPAs when they're first put in place? Yes, I completely agree with that. It's done for many industries. I don't know why we wouldn't do it for harvesters and fishers. We need to stop having short-term vision of things. MPAs don't work for the next day. There is some time that needs to move on before we see the benefits of those bigger fish and so on. So a compensation would be appropriate for that time. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. And next we'll go to Mr. Beaulieu for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As my colleague mentioned, what we heard from the witnesses today is that they pretty much all say that there is no consultation, that their recommendations are not taken into account. Why do you think it is that way? Is that for me? Is that question for me, Mr. Beaulieu? Okay, apologies. What I think is that there are many, many associations, there are many consultations that take place. Things need to be prepared in advance, which the department is trying to do, but I believe there is definitely lack of transparency. There needs to be more communication. Now, a better network for involving organizations from the very beginning would be good. An association that would be in charge of collecting all of that information and those proposals from fishers and other associations, not a process that would start just a few months, but way before. So we had to start consultations last September for the season that's coming up. So there is a time lapse. So what you're proposing is that there be one independent organization, independent from the government, that takes care of these consultations to put forward proposals for these MPAs. Yes, I would say independent from the government, yes. I heard the first panel of witnesses, and I believe that everybody agreed that there needs to be like a judge and jury concept for an independent organization. We see some of that in Europe, for example. There are better ways in Norway, for example, to build more trust in the system so that harvesters and fishers associations can have more trust in the system, be more part of it. There is at least one witness who spoke about lobbyists who were at consultations, who seem to have been consulted before meetings with harvesters. And it seems like there were previous government officials participating in those groups, those lobbyist groups. What do you think of that situation? Well, if there are lobbyists on the ocean protection lobbyists, well, there are just as many lobbyists on the fisheries side. So I'm not an expert at all, but I've seen lobbyists on both sides of the medal. So I really want to exclude that from the equation personally. So you would exclude both environmental organizations and fisheries lobbyists. Yes, in both cases, that would be ideal. Scientific data collected from various stakeholders and information from all groups that would be impacted by the MPA, so fishers groups and all others, tourism, my fellow witnesses have stated, or harvesters, residents, Indigenous communities, and scientists, of course, to have clear data to be able to take proper decisions. Earlier, we talked about compensation. Harvesters, or the witnesses we heard, were saying that they were not in favor at all, but they also stated that nobody had received any compensation. Have you personally seen any compensation for any fishers, for people impacted by MPAs? No, I've never gotten any information on that, and that's very far from my field of expertise in terms of compensation. My apologies for that. All right, so what should we do to get more buy-in from harvesters in setting MPAs? I think we need to see them and to bring them with us on the boat, on the sea, with researchers and others. And I promise you, when I'm in a fisheries exclusion area for lobster, for example, and the fishers are there on the boat with us and they see the bigger lobsters, the females with more eggs, they suddenly are much more favorable to the idea. So perhaps the impacts of protected marine areas isn't very well understood. So maybe that's why. Well, I think that everybody who works on the sea has the same, or has a goal of protecting the areas. But I think we just need to be able to show the points that are the really positive points of these MPAs. There are many studies from around the world, and we always say, the grass is always greener. So we just need more information to. We also say, it's different where I am. International studies are great, but, I want information from where we are. But I think it's important to be able to compare where we're at. But when we have our own studies in our own area, in our own backyard, it gives us a much better idea of what's happening and what the benefits are. It's much easier to understand the benefits, than having data from Norway or Australia or elsewhere. Thank you very much. And Ms. Riggs, have you ever been part of these consultations? What do you think about these ties between fishers and the fishing industry and the department?
And Ms. Rigg, if you could give a very brief answer, because we are at time here.
Yes. So I will say in Guayhanas, for example, the fishing community was actually the most singularly consulted group when the marine zoning was decided. So there were fisheries liaisons, commercial fisheries liaisons. There was a advisory committee that had different sectoral representation, including fisheries. There were bilateral meetings with different sectors. And then there was also the DFO IFMP process that engaged fisheries. So it was an exceptionally consulted sector when the zoning for Guayhanas was done, much more so than marine tourism, for example, as tour operators. That said, I support that. I want to be clear, I support that.
I must interrupt. We need to proceed to the next person.
We're going to go into an abridged second round here for 4 minutes, 4 minutes, and 2 minutes, just being aware of the time here. But with that, I'll pass the floor to Mr. Small for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and I welcome the witnesses. To Mr. Archibald, First Nations in the North are in numerous joint venture arrangements for harvesting Greenland halibut, also known as turbot, and prawns. This is an important part of their interaction with the ecosystem to earn a living by harvesting the oceans of the North. And it's an important part of reconciliation with our First Nations in the North. Why do you want to prohibit their fishing, their earning a living, and the reconciliation process that's been undertaken by giving them more access to fishing in partnerships with other groups in the North?
Merci pour votre question. First of all,
Thank you for your question.
prohibited, so I just want to correct you. I just said we need to protect some area, so that's quite different than prohibited someone of fishing. And I think it's really important here in this case. Then we evaluate, especially for the Arctic, everything is changing at a pace. Then we don't have the data. We don't have we have some information, but not enough to take sound decision. So I would say presently we're going in the North to measure some of these variables, some of the change once a year. So
you just said that you don't have the data, you don't have the necessary parameters outlined to make these decisions. Why do you want to continue on the path that you're on when you just said that basically it doesn't make sense?
Well, I'm looking for the exact term here, but the consultation for protection is not to destroy from the very beginning before knowing what can be excluded. I'm sure you'd rather go to the doctor once a week to find out what your health is like instead of going only once a year. If we currently don't have the information right now to say, we can keep fishing at a high rate, I'm not saying we cannot fish at all. I want there to be proper parameters so we can use our capital, as I said earlier.
Thank you. To Ms. Riggs, Mr. Maven spoke earlier about the fishing productivity of the northern bioregion in the proposed protected area that's in AOI right now. The Canadian cotton-produced fish and seafood contribute immensely to Canadian food security. Would you agree?
I think fishing is an important part of the North Pacific economy, absolutely.
We've had witnesses tell this committee that areas to be closed to fishing are so productive for fish harvesting that production will not be replaced outside these current and proposed protected areas. It'll be impossible. Will this impact the food security for Canadians?
We heard the same thing in all the protected area initiatives that have happened, all these discussions. It's not surprising that fishermen are concerned about the precedent of areas that they might lose access to. I think that the most important thing is that fishermen are involved, as I mentioned previously, in the decision-making and the designing of marine protected areas, and that full efforts are made to mitigate impacts on all sectors, including fishing. I think that food security in Canada is a much larger issue and is one that is not going to be solved by allowing fishing everywhere or restricting certain conservation initiatives that are intended in the long term to benefit everyone.
So I've just a couple of seconds left here.
I'm afraid we're already out of time here.
My time's short.
So we're just 4 minutes for this round.
You cut him short. You're cutting me short.
No, I'm very much not Mr. Small, but I am afraid we do need to move on. So next we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Ms. Riggs. Ms. Riggs, one thing that has been clear with the testimony given before this committee is that the process leaves a lot to be desired, and that has led to. Would you agree that the MPAs? There's been a lot of fear mongering around MPAs and the impact they would have on commercial fishers.
I do agree that there has been a lot of fear mongering. I can't speak to the processes in the East and the Atlantic coast and the Arctic. In the North Pacific, the processes that I have been a part of and that I am aware of have been exceptionally comprehensive and have engaged fishermen from start to finish.
It's because you made the comment, fishers were the most consulted group in a particular area. Could you expand on that a bit? Because we keep hearing that fishers were not consulted.
So I was speaking to the Guayhanas area. It's a National Marine Conservation Area Reserve, and the fishing sector was exceptionally involved in that process in terms of the comprehensive marine zoning that was done and completed in 2018. Other sectors were involved as well, but not to the same extent. I will say that that area allows for fishing in over half of the National Marine Conservation Area Reserve. It's only in strict protection areas that commercial fishing is not allowed.
So yes, because there's a general theme that is given by those that are opposed to it, that fishing is not allowed in MPAs. So in this particular one, to be clear for the record, fishing is allowed?
Fishing is allowed in over half of the area, and it is in multiple use zones. Fishing, commercial and recreational fishing is allowed. It's only in the strict protection zones that it isn't. And yet the entire area would be considered a marine protected area and contribute towards the targets that are being discussed, even though trawling, for example, bottom trawling is allowed in Guayhanas in certain areas and continues. And that would be calculated as part of the protection initiatives that are being discussed.
Thank you. You referenced MPA design that makes sense. Could you again expand on your definition of how on what would make sense?
Well, I think that people
earlier.
Yeah, and I think it's about minimizing impacts, deciding what is important to protect, what areas are important to protect, what the values are in those areas, and minimizing impacts on users in those areas, including commercial and recreational fishermen. So the design of an MPA can minimize impacts on sectors, and I've heard other speakers sort of talk about it as an attack on fisheries or a closure of fisheries, and yet the design work that we've been a part of and are familiar with has really worked to minimize impacts to below, 8% of commercial fisheries. So I think you can do this work in a way that is scientifically driven and intentional and designed to try and meet the long-term sustainability of sectors across the board. Tourism isn't the answer on Haida Gwaii. It's one part of the question. We want to see fisheries there. We want to see a healthy forestry industry. We need to diversify our economies, and marine protected areas are not a threat to fisheries in the way that I've heard them presented by some people.
Thank you. I had a question for Professor Archambault, but I believe I'm out of time.
So, et on va continuer avec.
We will continue with Mr. Beaulieu, our last speaker at this committee for 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Ms. Riggs, well, you said that there were many consultation efforts. Do you believe the consultations involved private fishers during the process? Involved them enough?
Yes, there were extensive discussions with both fishing representatives as well as individual fishermen. The fishing industry on the West Coast is not. In the past, it was small boats in coastal communities. Nowadays, it's much more quota concentrated, owned by a lot of the quotas owned by corporations, and even recreational fishing is owned by big businesses with deep pockets that have profited from this from fishing for a very long time. So I think finding those individual fishermen it's harder these days, and they have a lot to contribute because they've seen change over time. I did see efforts to engage individual fishermen as well as sector representation in the processes that I've been a part of.
Comment vous expliquez que les autres témoins...
Some of the other witnesses we heard from seem to be saying that they weren't consulted, it's not working, but according to you, it seems to be working well in your area.
It is working well, and it can be done right. I can't speak to their personal experience, but I think there is when solutions are created by a group and then brought to a table, other people have say in that too. First Nations, marine transportation, tourism, all these other sectors contribute. The answer can't be dictated by one sector. It has to be a collaborative process. And if individuals and groups are presenting as having not been consulted sufficiently, it could be because they're unhappy with the end design, thinking that it should have reflected their interests entirely. I'm speculating, but I think that the answer is that everybody needs to be at the table and needs to make those decisions together so that we understand why certain areas are important to continue to allow fishing activity and other areas are important to protect, to enable other cultural or ecological objectives to be achieved.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Beaulieu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beaulieu.
We'll conclude our second panel. Again, I want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to be here today, and again with your flexibility with some of the technical difficulties that we were experiencing as well. Your testimonies are going to be very, very helpful as we finalize our report and the recommendations to government that will be flowing from that as well. But that we are going to briefly suspend in order to move into the last part of our meeting in camera. So members of the public and witnesses will therefore need to leave the room before we get started with that.
you.